Hey everybody, and welcome to another segment of Shaking the Damn Table called Black Rights Matter. And today we're joined with attorney Richard A. Rice. I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself, tell you guys what he does and where you guys can follow him and all that kind of stuff.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on your show. I love the name of your podcast, Shaking the Damn Table. That's going right now, and I always wonder, like, what will it take for some people to realize, like, the more you take, then the more that's going to kind of be dumped on top of you, and when you reach that point of being fed up, then you have to act accordingly to change things. But yeah, so I love that title. Wish I would have thought of that first. Yeah, so like you said, my name is Richard Rice. I'm originally from Huntsville, currently living in Birmingham, as I have for the last 10 years. And I am the owner and founder of the Rice Firm, LLC, which is a public interest law firm that's primarily based in Birmingham. We practice all over the state. We take clients from all over Alabama and also oftentimes work with attorneys in other jurisdictions, too. My firm is fairly diverse. Public interest law certainly includes civil rights cases that can include, unlawful stops and seizures, unlawful arrests, excessive force. We represent folks who have been wrongfully convicted. We represent people who are incarcerated, who have not received adequate medical attention, who have not, been protected from other threats that may be there. And sometimes they're also subjected to excessive force. And we do other types of, cases as well, too, but I won't get into all of that right now. I think that's probably most relevant for our topics today. And, if you want to find out more information about me, you can check out my website, thericefirmllc.com. And I'm on Facebook. I have a personal page that's public. You can check out a lot of information about what I'm involved in there. I have an Instagram page, which is just my name on both of them. Richard A. is my middle initial, Rice. And also have the Results with Attorney Richard Rice, which is a podcast that I do as well. So those are the best locations to find out more information about me.
Oh, awesome. Definitely going to have to check out your podcast, too.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get into the conversation today. One thing I really wanted to talk about today was the talk, not the birds and the bees, but the other talk that is pretty prevalent in a lot of Black families. One thing that was interesting to me, when Corey Wise came to Birmingham to speak, I asked him if he ever had the talk before he got arrested. And he said that he didn't. And that, to me, just, kind of brought up the question, like, when we have those conversations in our home, can that help change an outcome about how we go into those situations when being approached by the police? So one thing I wanted to ask you was, like, what do you feel about the talk? Like, do you feel there's a certain age that's appropriate to have that with Black children?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and I think, somebody like Corey Wise is definitely, has a lived experience to really speak on that. And he's somebody that, one of my co-hosts on the podcast that I did interviewed him with B94.9, and great experience, like he really had so much, just lived experience in terms of seeing the negative side of our criminal justice system, up close and firsthand, and then really coming full circle now, being an outspoken international advocate and celebrity, really. So somebody that's good to talk to on those type of things. And, what's an appropriate age? I don't know. It's one of those things where it's something that we do because we have to. I don't know if it's really a reasonable expectation or what. Ask the question, what's the mental health? What's the toll on our psyche, our mental health? Because basically we're telling our children that we want them to be the authority in the situation if they should have an encounter with a professional police officer who has, hundreds of hours of training. And we're asking them to be the calm authority, to be the adult in the room, so to speak, and to be able to de-escalate situations. And I think that it's a necessary conversation. I don't think it's ideal. I believe that we really do need to be reimagining, our society to the extent that it involves these type of interactions with police officers. and we shouldn't be, so quick to acquiesce to these conditions in which we think that it's the norm for us to have these conversations, to have the talk. And, for those who don't know that are listening and watching, I mean, the talk is basically, it's related to that conversation your parents probably had with you where they said you got to be twice as good, twice as fast,
Yeah.
twice as smart, so it all flows from that same ideology that, that the system is biased, our overall society is, and that we live in a system that's really set up to support white supremacy. And a lot of times that leads to a particular bias against African Americans. In those situations where you encounter law enforcement, you need to be extra careful. People tell you things like make sure that you have a current registration, make sure you have a current driver's license, and that both of those items are already out in plain sight, so that you don't have to reach in a glove compartment or reach for your wallet, anywhere that may assume that you are reaching for a weapon or anything like that. Is it reasonable? No. I said that. I'm going to say it again. Make sure that you have, your lights are all working, your turn signal, the light on your tag, because that can create a reason for you to be stopped. And then those type of traffic stops lead to all different other types of inquiries, and sometimes can lead to excessive force and illegal seizures and things of that nature. So, your question, what's an appropriate age? I think it depends on the child, but I do think earlier is better, 6, 7, or 8 years old, honestly, just so that you can lay that groundwork, there's something that's not new to them, that they understand it and they appreciate the history. I think that it's important that we teach our children about history as it relates to this particular issue, how this institutional policing was started, what is chattel slavery, and what are the remnants of it that still exist today. So I would tie it all into that conversation more so than just putting that additional burden on a child to
Yeah.
leader in a situation with a law enforcement official.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially just because that can also instill a lot of like fear and confusion within a child as well, just as far as like, well, my mom said I have to do X, Y, and Z whenever this happens with a police officer. So as soon as they see a police officer, that's their kind of like fear being instilled. And of course, a lot of Black people do already have that internalized trauma from seeing situations, being in situations and stuff as well. So I do think that's a really good point that you made about that. One other reason why I brought this up was because the Black Panther Party was very adamant about knowing your rights when they challenged the police, and everything that they've gone through is a direct mirror into what we're going through right now. So I wanted to talk about like different kind of rights and stuff like that you think is important for people to know when they are encountered by a police officer for a minor stop that may be going left or could turn into a situation, just like things to be aware of or things that you should know they can't do and things that you can do in that situation.
Right. So, I mean, this is another great question. This is something that, as a public interest law firm, public interest attorney, and civil rights attorney, I oftentimes partner with bar associations such as the Magic City Bar Association, which was founded back in the 1980s, before the Birmingham Bar Association was integrated. I also work with the National Lawyers Guild, which is a national bar association that's set up to ensure that human rights are made a priority over property rights, which is a very important concept within this current context of this conversation, and just overall as a principle within a democratic society and a capitalist society. That's a point that we need to really stress. But in terms of what rights you need to know or be aware of, the first thing I would say is that it's kind of contradictory, but I want to make both of these points, is that you need to know your rights, and sometimes it's better to enforce those rights in a retroactive perspective. I wouldn't try to litigate like a court case with an officer on the street in the middle of the night, no lights, not anybody, no eyes, nothing. It's like you could be right, but it could end up with the wrong conclusion, and who's going to be there? Even if there is body cam footage or you're recording it on Facebook, and so I think we need to be careful. We need to choose our battles, carefully. But even with that being said, you really can't assert a right, or you really don't realize the benefit of a right if you're not aware of it, and if you don't, leverage it at the appropriate time.
Mm-hmm.
And the Terry v. Ohio case is a U.S. Supreme Court case from 1968, and it's kind of the seminal case on determining what is a reasonable seizure or what is a reasonable stop.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the important distinctions to make in these situations is if you're out, walking, and even if you're protesting, I want to get into some of those rights too if we have time.
Yeah, for sure.
If just doing your thing, maybe you're walking or driving and you're stopped, it's important for you to ask the officer, why am I being stopped, why am I being detained? And those questions are important because the Supreme Court has essentially said that if you're voluntarily engaging the officer and giving them information and just allowing them to chat you up like as if they're not on the job and working, then that may not necessarily invoke your rights under the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment is there to make sure that that your rights of due process are adhered to before you have any type of unlawful seizure or anything like that. And a seizure can just be a situation in which you're detained and you do not have the police officers using their legal authority to prevent you from leaving, or they are physically detaining you in those situations. But it doesn't require physical detainment. It's really more of would a reasonable person in that situation feel as though they had to stay there and engage with the officer. And if that fits the situation, then you're likely operating under this Fourth Amendment analysis in which the officer would only be able to detain you or keep you if they had a reasonable suspicion. And the definition of a reasonable suspicion is really based on the circumstances, but at the very least, the officer should be able to articulate what that suspicion is, and that suspicion should be related to you, that officer believing that you have, he or she has witnessed you committing a crime, or you're currently engaged in committing a crime, or sometimes they'll say you fit the description or something like that. But in those situations, you do have a right to ask those questions, and you do need to know why you're being detained or what that suspicion is. And at the very least, like I said, the officer should be able to articulate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what were some of the protest rights you were?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're a protester, first of all, you need to know, do you have any active warrants? I know it sounds silly and people, but that's true. I see people go out protesting and they didn't know they had a failure to appear warrant on a traffic ticket or whatever the case may be. And that can just really, add insult to injury if you have a situation or an encounter with a police officer and they happen to run your name or whatnot. So that would be my first piece of advice. The second thing is before you go to the protest, just, I would, obviously you have a First Amendment right to protest, to do demonstrations and direct action, and I don't think we can really overstate the value of that in a democratic society, especially in this current time frame and circumstances that we're in right now. And then I would also say that, you should know the difference between what's an arrestable offense and what is an arrestable offense. And, certain things, certain lawful orders that a police officer gives you, then you would need to obey a lawful order. And if you don't, then that could be grounds for what's called disorderly conduct. I would also tell people not to take any type of illegal, any contraband or anything with them to protest. It seems silly, but it happens.
Yeah.
Makes my job more difficult when you do those types of things.
Right, trying to help you get off, man.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And if you're intending to be arrested, then, have a plan of action already in place. And, I wouldn't encourage you, obviously, be cooperative in terms of, how you're communicating with the officers, if that's your plan. So that's just some basic advice that I would give you in those type of situations. But you certainly have a First Amendment right to protest. I think it's usually, depending on the circumstances, better to protest on public spaces. But I wouldn't try to tell an activist or organizer, specifically what to do or how to do it. I would just try to make sure that they understand the risks associated with their actions and the potential ramifications so that they can make an informed decision. So, reach out to me if you have those types of questions.
Yeah, so that's another thing I was about to ask. What are some resources that you would like suggest to people in Alabama or their respective states for finding out more about like different rights that they have and these stops and stuff?
Yeah, so National Lawyers Guild is a great resource, and then also the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. They have a state organization and it's a national organization. And you can check out their websites. You can email me or message me on Facebook or Instagram. And my firm and some other attorneys have compiled a list of kind of know your rights. We have know your rights for traffic stops, and then we also have know your rights as a protester. So I probably should have pulled that out so I could have read through them today, but I have that, and I can share that with you as well. But I did cover just the general, in broad strokes. I covered the general message that's included, but we have more specifics that if you would like that as well, then I'd be happy to send that to you. But yeah, I would say National Lawyers Guild. You can even look at the NAACP. They probably would have some good information. The ACLU, or contact me directly, and I'll put you in contact. Or give you what I've produced already.
I'll definitely ask you for a copy for myself, but I'm going to put all this information up so that people can look it up. That's really great. Thank you. Did you have any questions, Jasmine, about like stops or the talk that we were talking about earlier?
At what age do you deem it necessary to talk to our kids about what to do when we're at a traffic stop or when a policeman pulls you over?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I think, obviously when kids start driving, 15 or 14 is a good age because they're going to have more autonomy and they won't be with you. But, I think kids walk to class or school sometimes or go to the store, convenience store when they're maybe 8 or 9. And sometimes if they have older siblings or kids in the neighborhood they trust, they may even be walking, kind of with a group of other kids at an earlier age than that. So, to the extent that you're allowing your children to proceed in public without you, then I would have that talk with them early on. And, Mina and I talked about laying the foundation before that talk because the talk is burdensome, and I don't know if it's really healthy, from a psychological or mental standpoint. But then again, it's necessary. It's a necessary talk to have. So you have to weigh the cost in that situation and say, this is something that could be psychologically burdensome and emotionally burdensome to my child, but the alternative is they could be in a situation that they're not prepared for. So I'm going to go ahead and have a talk with them earlier, and I'm going to talk to them about chattel slavery and African diaspora. I'm going to talk to them about white supremacy, but I'm still going to talk to them about meeting people of all races and nationalities and evaluating those people on an individual basis, and allowing those people to define themselves, but still being able to, walk and chew gum at the same time to understand systemic racism, but, not in turn become somebody who is, biased against other races too. So to answer your question, the earlier the better, but I would lay a foundation that really gives context, that history about why it's necessary rather than just, telling kids this is what you have to do, because it's kind of ridiculous for us to tell our kids to be the adult in the room with a police officer. Police officers, a paid professional with hundreds of hours of training. And then we're telling our kids who don't, biologically haven't even fully developed yet mentally to be able to de-escalate a situation with an adult who is armed with a deadly weapon, several of them. And we're asking them to be the negotiator in that situation. Think about how ridiculous that is. It's like,
right.
Hard to imagine because that's anything different because that's all we know. But it's just it's really ridiculous. It shouldn't be that way, and it's unreasonable to have that expectation. But we have to do what we have to do, and that's human nature, I suppose. So it's a long answer.
Too, I think, for I guess kids to really grasp that before experiencing, because it's contradictory to what we teach them to obey the authority, no matter what they say. So I think it's interesting to kind of be like, hey, you got to be the one to know that this is like stand your ground on what your rights are, or whatever, whenever you're in the room with somebody who is of that authority. But yeah, I agree, it is ridiculous. We shouldn't have to do it, but It
Well,
definitely
yeah,
prepares more.
let's call a question like how old were you when you were like became aware of racism or systemic racism issues like when you had your first experience? How old were you?
Mm,
I mean, so
that's a good
I
question.
I grew up from the north, so I definitely had more experience with different races than
Mhm.
moving down south, and I feel like that transition is what everything kind of just clicked. I can't really even say like a age of like when I really noticed stuff, but once I like, because one, my parents were like, oh, we're gonna move like down south somewhere hotter, and the only place I could think of was like Arizona, like a desert. So I didn't know what a Alabama was. So coming down here and then being forced to be in 16th Street Baptist Church, that just opened up a different kind of, I guess, awareness when hearing history in general in school than I probably would have being up north.
Yeah.
But that was like the middle of second grade, so it's like young. Yeah.
Yep. Very early on. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'd say my experience, I took heed more when like I got a job and had to interact with different people, and it's like even the simplest, oh, have a good day, and you get the cold shoulder, and it's just like I did nothing wrong, so it takes a second just to say you too. So it's just like it's just mind blowing.
Yeah, it is. It is. And like I said, sometimes things are so common, then we think. I mean, it becomes normal, but that doesn't make it right. I just think we should still be ready to stand up and make a point or shake the damn table or whatever the case may be. Call it out though. Do something.
Hmm.
And that's an impact. You may not feel like you can change the issue yourself, like you can maybe change the 1901 Constitution of Alabama and take out the racist language and the racist policies, but you can, once a week call out a different part of the Constitution on your Facebook page. You can, educate people in your church or your community about those disparities and, continue to build up to that critical mass where you will, be that change. And we never know what step is the pivotal step. We never know what word or action is the pivotal word or action until it happens after the fact. So, I believe in having that aspiration and belief before you do it, and just being persistent but being patient in it to the extent that you don't allow yourself to grow weary, but still like pushing forward, taking small steps every day, and those small steps add up, or maybe that small step isn't as small as you thought it was in hindsight. So I know we kind of got off on a tangent, but I think it's
No,
good though to talk about it and certainly related.
agreed. Um, On to something in the similar sense of as far as like knowing things that we can do. Um, Yesterday they protested outside of the Attorney General's home to get justice for Breonna Taylor. And I think a lot of people, because it's just ridiculous that for her and so many other people who we don't name every day, who haven't received any justice as far as seeing these killers being really prosecuted in any type of way. Some people, we don't even really ever get to know the names of the officers or anything like that. But I just wanted to ask you, what do you think are the best ways for us citizens to be able to demand justice for people who haven't received it?
Yeah, I mean, I like what the organizers and activists are doing there, Kentucky. I think it's appropriate. I think that the police officers involved in that situation, the cases should be presented to a grand jury, and they should be indicted. And they should be prosecuted. And I think that only one of the officers has been terminated, and maybe the other two are on administrative leave. And this idea of no knock warrants is really it's the fabrication of what's really needed, in my opinion. I think you know, this idea that we need to be able to go up in the middle of the night or in the early hours of the morning and just enter somebody's house without announcing or that type of thing. I really don't see the potential benefit that how it outweighs the risk involved in these type of situations. And of course, we tend to be disproportionately targeted, African Americans, minorities. So I'm just not for it at all. So I think speaking out against those type of policies that create this type of situation. And again, understanding the history that brought us to this point of what the institution of policing, how the inception of it was initially, why it was started, and all of those things are helpful. But to answer your question more specifically, what I would tell people is to stay engaged on these cases like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, because they are important, very important cases. But, I see so many folks here. I can run down a list, maybe 5 to 10 names right now of people that have been killed by police officers. And, maybe in some of those cases, or most of them, the law said that the officer could use deadly force. But what I'm telling you is they didn't have to. They didn't have to affect whatever the mission was. And sometimes I don't even know what the mission was. I don't know what they were trying. We had a case in Huntsville, a man named Dana Fletcher, who was suspected of looking suspicious while leaving a gym in which he was a paying member. And ultimately the police, Madison Police, which is the city that where I'm from, the Madison Police Department shot and killed him in front of his daughter and his wife in this parking lot. And at the time, when the police were called, he looked suspicious, is what the caller said to the police on 911. So I don't know that that's a crime. I'm not sure what code that's written in, if it is, to look suspicious. But, I mean, he lost his life for what? And I've seen situations in which officers could have used less force or de-escalated, or situations where a mental health professional, had they been the first responder, then they would have been able to keep the situation calm and make sure that, that it didn't escalate to the point of loss of life. Who could have used, a taser, or could have just been more patient and asked questions first, they could have avoided it, but the law is set up in such a way that it provides so many protections to police officers and justifications for their behavior, because there's this perception in the public that being a police officer is the most dangerous profession, which is dangerous, but it's not the most dangerous profession if you look at the statistics and the data. And also, the public doesn't want to second guess a police officer, because they believe that these people are acting in a professional way and they have professional training, and it's a fast-paced job and you need to be able to think on your feet and not be apprehensive, so we want to give them autonomy. But at the end of the day, we all exist. We're citizens. We're all players in this democracy, and we all have to have checks and balances, and none of us should have any type of absolute autonomy, or a blank check, so to speak, to be able to do whatever we want without having those actions reviewed. And if we did, then really we wouldn't be able to exist in a democratic society. It would be something more authoritarian. And I think we have too many elements of that right now, and it's up to us as individuals to take that back. And the way we would do that is really being hyperly engaged in our local incident, and what's going on in our local community, local elections, their local officials, make sure that they are implementing what I would call citizens review boards, which allows a group of concerned citizens and other stakeholders to be a body that has the legal authority to review the actions of police officers when they use force, or when they are, executing warrants and things of that nature, which it could be more of an invasion of privacy issue as opposed to a threat of physical force. That review board would have the legal authority to put political pressure and other pressure on these officers, even in terms of taking their job and other penalties. And that would create another layer of accountability, because the criminal system and the civil justice system, in which we have the ability to review the actions of police officers, again, is biased, and it has in it things like qualified immunity that affords officers so much protection that it's sometimes difficult for us to hold them accountable. But with political pressure, with this political body, if we created it, then that would be another avenue. And also, I believe in defunding police, which is taking money from the police budget and reallocating it to other things such as social workers and mental health workers, job creation and job training. So if you're very involved and engaged in your local government, then you can advocate for those types of things. Another thing I would say is, who is the Breonna Taylor in your neighborhood? Who is the George Floyd in your neighborhood? Right now I'm representing a family out of Pickens County, the Wallace Wilder case, and Mr. Wilder was a 62-year-old individual who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia more than 20 years prior to the date that he was shot and killed in his own home. he was unarmed. The police were called to come out and do a quote unquote wellness check, and that wellness check, some type of way, ended up with the police officers coming into his home without his permission after they had confirmed that he was home alone, and ultimately he was shot multiple times, at least 3 to 4 times in the back, and now he's deceased. And so, you know, that's a case that's ongoing right now. That case is under investigation by the Alabama Attorney General's office, Steve Marshall, and his team investigating the case. And potentially, you know, charges are going to be brought against Sheriff Todd Hall, who's the sheriff of Pickens County. The sheriff is still on active duty right now, even though he's being investigated. You know, and that's a legal conundrum in a lot of ways. Folks say, well, who has the authority to remove him from office? Well, I would say a federal judge does. I believe the state attorney general could. But, you know, this is somewhat of a novel issue in some ways. I mean, how many times has someone like that been removed from office? He can be voted out. He certainly can, but how much time has to lapse before that happens? And there's another shooter involved in that case that hasn't even been identified, you know, publicly anyway. And so I would ask you to find out who's a George Floyd in your neighborhood, who's the Breonna Taylor in your neighborhood, and once you find out, then go out and be an advocate on behalf of that individual and that family to create justice for them, and also to bring about, you know, meaningful substantive change for your community and your neighborhood. And then from there, once we are all experts on the cases and, you know, allegations of police misconduct in our own neighborhood, then we can then link together as a network or a cooperative to bring about national change and national publicity. But we all need to be responsible for our own community and territory first. And to the extent that we do that, I think we'll be much more effective in actually making meaningful change, because many of these things can be changed on a local level, especially when you talk about policing. And so for the folks here in Birmingham, you should be, you know, calling your city council member, calling Mayor Woodfin, and telling them that we don't believe that we should spend almost $100 million per year on policing when our annual budget is $450 million. And we're still seeing over 100 homicides per year. We're still seeing, you know, more property crime than we would like to see. We're seeing more gun violence than we would like to see. So what we're asking for is what are the alternatives? You know, what's the opportunity cost of spending $100 million on policing? Can we allocate 10% of that, 25% of that to another cause? You know, is that something that's feasible or, you know, practical? And so that's what I think we can do to bring about justice on behalf, you know, and then the last thing I would say is don't be reactive, you know, don't just be reactive. We got to react sometimes, you know, certain things happen and we need a response, appropriate response to nature. But I would also say, you know, have a plan of action. Once you identify what the problems are and you identify how you fit into that, like what your expertise or value is you add, have a plan, stick to it. You know, you can deviate sometimes, but come back to your plan. Don't allow all of these, you know, new stories every day to keep you just like on this just emotional roller coaster, and you're constantly responding, trying to put out a fire rather than building what it is that you want to see. So I would just, those are the things I would say is, you know, just to be knowledgeable on, you know, the history that brought us here, and then just to be focused on a local level so that you can be engaged with the voting and the advocacy, you know, related to these issues. You know, those would be the things that I think would be most important.
In your opinion, do you think that now is the time to where we need to get back to how they had workshops during the civil rights movement? Do you think protesters should hold workshops, like nonviolent workshops like they did during the civil rights movement again, so that way we can be better prepared for what's to come?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Jasmine, I think that's a perfect question. And yes, I do. I think we need more training for our organizers and activists, and just for the public in general. We talked a little bit about know your rights workshops. That's kind of what you're mentioning. Know your rights as a citizen, and know your duties. Know your duties too. You know, like right now we had 22% voter turnout in Birmingham, I think, in the previous municipal election. Obviously, we have a presidential election coming up in November of this year, and then the municipal election is in early fall next year, in August, I believe. And we just had a special election yesterday here. But we need to know what our duties are. We have a social contract to be engaged, and there's a quote that says a citizen is the highest office in the land, but it only is if you act accordingly, and if you just sit back and chill and, do your thing on social media, but don't really get out and go to city council meetings or join your neighborhood association or join a nonprofit or even start one, then you're not going to be engaged and informed. And when you don't do that, then you create space for bad actors or bad culture to permeate. And I think it's up to us to get out and kind of stomp that out and weed it out to the extent that we can by being engaged. And those trainings that they did back in the 60s and the civil rights and the Black Panther Party, they did similar types of training. They held school. They did homeschooling for their kids. I think this is a perfect opportunity to reconsider homeschooling because the risk with COVID-19 and I know how like private school and daycares can be, but Black folks have a history, and not just us, but we really have done it well, maybe better than others, of like really coming together and pulling our resources together and doing it in a way that kind of creates something new and does it in a way that highlights excellence and exceptionalism. And I think we have an opportunity to do that now. Put our kids in school and teach them, about arithmetic, math, and science and technology, but teach them history, understanding what the African diaspora is and what our role is right now in that ongoing conversation and movement about, humanity's struggle for justice and, how we need to have a compassionate form of capitalism, if at all, and what that really means, what that translates into. So I'm saying a lot, but I think we need those training sessions, and I think we can even take it further and really just begin to have just, maybe start having virtual coffee shop conversations and little things like that, just to create a culture that's more inclined to be informed and knowledgeable in the information age. We all have access to so much information, how we're going to use it, how we're going to leverage it. And, wisdom is a process. It requires at least, acquiring the knowledge. Then you need to know like when to use the knowledge and then to have the courage to then use it at the appropriate time. And, I think that requires us to have, like you said, to know what's right first, but then to have a community around us to encourage us to know when and how to use it. And making sure that we feel strong enough in those moments of challenge and testing to be a voice for what's right, because it's not always easy to do those types of things. But at the very least, yes, the protesters and other folks should be having those trainings. There was one actually this weekend, I think, at the Vault, a group of folks from Selma, the Selma Nonviolence Center, which may not be the exact name, but essentially that's what it is. They do a lot of nonviolence training, which is not the same as being a peaceful protester. Those type of distinctions are important. But yes, I do think so.
One thing I wanted to go back to was you talking about, because I was actually going to ask a question about that, talking about like citizen review boards. Because I was going to ask a question like, we ain't got no kind of citizens arrest rights or nothing where we can pull them up, instead of us relying on a system that's, in benefit with them. But I liked what you said about that. Have you ever seen that in a city before that worked? Or
yeah, I mean, I can send you a list of the cities that have implemented citizens review boards. Some are more effective than others in terms of actually, at the end of the day, you want to empower people, everyday people, to have the authority to hold police accountable. And in some instances, what you'll see is the mayor or chief of police who will appoint every position to the board. And in those situations, you don't have enough diversity a lot of times, and so you have people that are, maybe more making excuses for the police and not really being as critical as they could be or should be. So the citizen review boards that are most effective are the ones that have a good mix of, organizers, activists, business owners, teachers, doctors, lawyers, and then you also have some people from law enforcement and some people from the government that'll make up the body too. But, in my opinion, you want to really see more of a predominance or prevalence of what we just call everyday people, that are on that board. And the boards that have what's called subpoena power a lot of times are more effective. That means they have the legal authority to demand that somebody show up for a hearing or to they produce documents, or they, can go inspect a certain space and things like that. So, so that those are some common factors with the citizen review board that are more common, and then I can, send you a list of cities that currently implement those, and also send you some cities that have cut their budget too. I think that's something important. Cut the police budget, and reallocate those funds. And this is something I didn't mention earlier that I think would be helpful is decriminalizing marijuana, because people talk about marijuana being a gateway drug, and I don't have to get into the, morality or the merits of all those arguments, because that's not what we're here for. But what I'm saying is that marijuana is a gateway drug to prison in a way. It allows police officers a lot of times to create what we talked about earlier, that articulable suspicion, or give them probable cause to annoy and harass instead of protect and serve. And they'll use that to say, this is a violation of law, so now let me see what else I can, stick to, what else I can get you for, what other types of charges I can hit you with.
The system, period.
That's true. System, and it's really broken. It's called broken windows policing. You take a low level offense, and then you use that to see how you can
later.
Yeah. So if we decriminalize it, we give people either a citation or we make it legal, and that too. Decriminalize it, it becomes a citable offense, something that could be ticketed, and it allows police to spend more time and resources on prosecuting and investigating what I would call higher priority crimes. But it would also limit the number of interactions between police officers and oftentimes African Americans, who are most likely to be stopped and harassed and annoyed based on a perceived violation of a marijuana law. Alabama Appleseed did a study here in Alabama maybe a year or two ago now, in which they specifically highlighted cities. City of Huntsville was 11 times more likely to arrest and prosecute African Americans as opposed to white people who were in possession of marijuana. And the study found that both communities smoke or use marijuana at the same frequency, but they were still 11 times more likely to be prosecuted, which is, is really difficult to understand how that could be the case, but it's true. And they're able to do that because our neighborhoods are so segregated, and a lot of times police forces are an occupying presence in African American communities.
Right. We actually talked about that a little bit last episode. We were talking about the legalization of marijuana, because we have people learning about how to get into the drug business in some parts of the country, like in college, like they're making courses for it, and then in other parts it's still people who are in jail for years for something small. Like you said, being able to trump up charges and being able to just put somebody in the system so then they know how to get them back into
right. That's it, exactly. So, yeah, I think it's something that we can make an argument for. And on the budget side, it makes sense because it gives the officers, more resources to use for higher priority crimes, but also it's a good argument for community because we lower the number of interactions between police and our community.
Great. Well, you came up with a lot of good points and a lot of good answers to my questions. Honestly, I'm definitely looking forward to look into the information that you sent me and just reading more about things that we should know when encountering police officers, because I think after seeing When They See Us, that was like the main message that I got, because it was just heartbreaking to kind of see, like, on TV you always see people going to the police force or whatever, or going into the department if they're getting arrested or anything, and always being told, don't say anything, just say lawyer, that's it. But being in that kind of space, seeing them as children, being in that space and then being confused about how to go about the situation, like I said earlier, having that contradictory mindset of this is how you're supposed to deal with the police, but you're supposed to obey all authority as a child. It was just really interesting to see how that turned into the situation that it did, and them unfortunately losing their childhood due to that, just off of some simple things that maybe if they would have done, it wouldn't have happened.
That's true. Yeah, I think so. It's one of those things where you do have to walk a delicate line. And on one hand, it's like, don't volunteer any information. Don't presume that the officer wants to be your friend. It always really trips me out when I see these videos of police officers doing line dances at a barbecue.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
like, I've seen videos, like I saw, I think it was Takeoff or something. He was like driving like this brand new $1 million car, and the police pulled up behind him and pulled him over at the gas station, and they were just asking him all these questions, and he was just answering the questions back. He called his attorney, and at the end of the day, he shouldn't have cooperated with anything, because it wasn't an opportunity to build a relationship. It wasn't an opportunity to build trust. And as humans, we think, well, if I do a favor for you, if I'm respectful and cordial to you, then you're going to reciprocate that to me.
Mm-hmm.
But in the interacting with a police officer, whether you're a high profile rapper or not, it's not going to end well for you. They're fishing for information to use it as evidence against you. That's not to make me cynical to say that. That's the reality of the situation. So I would just
do could be used in the court of law. So
that's what read you your rights. That's right. Yeah. But a lot of times the thing about it is you don't have to have your rights read to you until you're under arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when you're under arrest is sometimes really clear and easy to know, but sometimes it's not. And you don't have to be read your rights when you're being detained. And a lot of times folks don't even have to be, they're not being detained, they're just voluntarily agreeing to stand there or to sit in their car and talk to the police officer. So I think it's important that I'm being detained. If this is a traffic stop, then why are you stopping me? I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I just want to know what is going on and that type of thing. And, voice inflection is important, and tone and volume in terms of making people feel comfortable. But, again, like I said, that's a lot to ask of young people. I think we need to shift the conversation and away from us putting all the responsibility on our kids and put a spotlight in the face of police officers. Like, we can do it, y'all. We don't have to be afraid or intimidated by somebody with a badge or a gun, but it's a time and a place. It's a time and a place to go to war, battle, or fight. Not speaking in literal terms, or maybe I am, but I just think that it's a time and a place and a way to do things. And, you don't necessarily want to have that battle and fight during a traffic stop. Maybe you do it at City Hall, or maybe you do it, protesting on the streets, or maybe you do it in a courtroom, or maybe sometimes you do it strategically during a traffic stop. I don't know the answer. If I did, I would be doing it right now. I can tell you that.
Well, I think you gave us a lot of great gems to just keep in the back of our minds, whether you have children or not, or if it's just you experiencing anything with a police officer at all. I think all that's really important. And now I'm going to look into a review board, because I definitely believe citizens arrest needs to be more prevalent in our society than what it has been, because like you said, we do have more power than what we go around thinking or how we act.
Right, most definitely. And thank you all for sharing your platform with me, and invite me back anytime. I'm enjoying invite me. I'll be available. We can do this again, and maybe you can come be a guest on my podcast at some point.
Yes,
and
most definitely.
The importance of having independent media. That's something I'm working on too. Keep up the good work. Yeah, that's all I can say. And again, I love the name of your.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the damn table with us.
I was a little bit more calm. If we could have done this at like maybe 10 or 11, like towards the beginning, then I probably would have been more animated. But it's all good. Hopefully we'll get a second chance.
Yeah, no, this is definitely the less animated version of me on the show, because usually I'm way more animated in language and all.
Definitely, because we're taking in all this information and we're learning, but instead of like we come on to you with questions and our opinions, then we'd be like more animated and like in your face with it.
Hey, and maybe we can organize one of those conversations that you mentioned, like some type of educational workshop. It can be virtual, or we can do it with social distance in a physical space. So let me know.
I'm definitely available to that. Thank you so much again for your time and your wisdom.